Hello, this is Kathy Wiggins coming to you straight from my home studio. This is what I look like. What you see is what you get. I did actually wash my hair and dry it this morning for you guys, but no makeup as you can see. So anyway, let's get started. I want to tell you, first of all, if you notice my t-shirt, I have a hashtag on it that said it's better than leather. It's better in leather. That's the hashtag that my business partners at Old City Quilts and I are using. And I would encourage you guys to start using it too as you start posting pictures of what you're doing with leather. And that way, whether you're on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever outlet you're on, if you do a search on hashtag it's better in leather, you can see what we're all doing when we're creating with leather. Okay, I'm going to try to quick and dirty answer a couple questions for you guys that I seem to be getting all the time. The first one is, where do I get my leather and how much does it cost? Because there's a lot of people that are interested in maybe giving it a try. They don't have any idea where to get the leather from, and they have this preconceived idea that it costs hundreds of dollars to do it. First of all, there's thousands of outlets for leather. You can even go to a thrift store. I get people all the time saying that I have a piece of leather that's hanging in my closet that I've had for years. Can I try that? Of course. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to experiment and to learn. So I challenge you to find leather wherever you can. Now, I've worked really hard the last couple of years to find the leather that I think that you'd be very successful with regardless of what machine you're having. That's the leather that we launched with Judy and Rob at Old City Quilts and myself launched at Spring Market this year. It's this, you'll see how thin and pliable this leather is. Okay? With this leather, I know that you can be successful regardless of what machine you have. If you want to give it a try, this is a great leather to start with. We have it available in 10 different colors. We're going to be launching some more colors for fall market, along with some metallics, and along in conjunction with that, probably another premium leather line too. So just keep that in mind. Now, as far as cost. Now, you can spend anywhere. If you want a whole hide, it can cost, a half a hide, it can cost you about $250. All the way down to a 4x4 inch square, which costs like $3 or $4. I recommend, if you want to start with something, start with a piece that's like 18 by 24. That's large enough to be able to make a bag out of. That's large enough to do a small whole cloth or a journal cover. 18 by 24 is a perfect size piece to start with. And they're going to range around like $45. So it's not a big investment to give it a try. So, and we have different sizes of pre-cuts. All of those you can find on the oldcityquilts.com website. To see what colors are available and what pre-cuts are available. And so that's where I recommend you start. Now, if you've got some hides that you have left over, go for those too. But you really want something that's real pliable, really thin, really nice weight to give yourself a chance to be successful to start with. Okay. Now, as far as layering my hides, I layer my leather just like I do any other quilt top. I have a backing, I have a batting, and then I have the leather on top. For backing purposes, you can use cotton. Now, I have found that, and I do use cotton most of the time, especially for wall hangings and that sort of thing. However, some of the pieces that you notice, like this one right here, that's got the raw edges on the edge, if I'm doing a big piece like that, like some of my Western pieces, then I will actually use a home deck fabric on the back because it's a little bit heavier and it gives it a little bit more strength to it to be able to hold, for the leather to hold its shape. So, but anyway, cotton backing is just fine. As far as batting goes, I like using something that's got a little bit of body. You've got to take in consideration that the leather is thicker. So therefore, it needs to have a little bit more support on it in order for it to be able to show off your quilting stitches. Okay, so I like using the 80-20 blend on the bottom, and then I will actually put an extra layer of wool that I've torn right behind the image itself, like right behind the horse image here, or right behind the little motorcycle guy, or right behind the dragon here. I tear off some wool to put right behind it to give it even more definition, so you get that faux trapunto type look. Okay, so, but again, it's whatever it is that you're looking for your end product to be. That's the same that you consider when you're working on a cotton quilt top. Is the same kind of questions you ask yourself for a leather one. Now, the big question: thread and needles. First of all, I have used everywhere from 100 weight silk all the way down to 40 weight. And so whatever the thread choice depends on what look you're going for on your leather. It's the same questions that you ask for when you're working on a quilt, on a cotton top. Do you want the definition and the texture to show for your quilting? Then you want to use a thinner thread. If you want the thread to show to add more color and contrast, then you want a thicker thread with a contrasting color. So those kinds of questions about the thread is exactly the same that you would have on a cotton quilt top. Do you want it shiny? So then you're going to use a shiny thread. If you want it more muted. Now, one thing I would recommend, because we are quilting through leather, is I would stay away from cotton, because cotton is going to fray more. So you really want to go with something other than cotton. Okay, so because it will fray, because you're going through leather. All right, now, big question. Let's talk about needles. All right. If you're on domestic machine, okay, now the domestic machine sewers, the garment sewers have known this for years, okay, there's different needles based on what it is you're sewing through, right? So if you're going to sew through leather, you use a leather needle. If you're going to sew through denim or jeans, you're going to use a jeans needle. The needle point is determined by what it is you're sewing through. The needle size is determined by the thread that you're going to use. Okay, so I hear this all the time. Well, I have to use a heavier, thicker needle because I'm sewing through leather. No, you match your needle size based on what thread you're using. The point is based on what it is that you're sewing through. Okay, so home sewers have known this for years, right? So you match your needle point based on what it is that you're sewing through. The same thing holds true for long arms. Okay, now long arm machines are industrial machines, and they're made like workhorses. And so can your long arm sew through a leather with a universal needle? Of course it can. Okay, it can force its way through anything because they are industrial machines. But however, a universal needle is not the best needle for the leather itself, because here's what's happening, guys. When you're using a universal needle, okay, that needle is tearing a hole through the leather. All right, when you use a leather needle, it's got a little knife point, so therefore it's cutting a hole through the leather. So you really want to use something that's going to cut a hole through the leather, because what happens is, if you've got if you're using a universal needle, depending on what leather you're working on, if you're tearing a hole through the leather, tearing a hole through the leather, tearing a hole through the leather, you can actually rip the top layer of that leather from hole to hole, depending on how close you're stitching together and what leather you're using. Now, will this happen on all leathers? No. Okay, and it could be that you can use your universal needle on your long arm with the leather that you use it and never see this issue. That's fine, but it will happen sometimes on some leathers. I've seen it happen most often on deer hides or cow hides that are finished like deer hides. So if you're using a universal needle and you're seeing those rips, that's what's happening. You need to get a diamond point or a leather needle for your long arm. Diamond point, only thing that means is it's shaped like a diamond. It's got a little knife on it. Okay, Grossbecker makes them. Of course they make them because they've had these industrial machines in factories for years, sewing on, making garments or making furniture, right? So they had to have them. It's just a matter, we had to find them. Long arms, for our long arms, it was difficult for me to be able to find them because nobody knew that they existed. But they do, okay? Old City Quilts has them. You can get them from them. They have the exact same numbers on them that all the ones that we're used to using have. Let's see, they come in 2 different sizes. There's a 19 and a 16. I have both. 19 is going to be used for the larger threads, the 16 for the smaller threads. What I like to do actually is I like to start with the 16 because I like to start with the smallest hole possible. And I did this even when I was using my painted whole cloths that I was using before I started doing leather. I start with that, and if my thread starts shredding, then I'll go up to the larger needle. So there are 2 different sizes, and so you match that with your thread. Now, as far as will it work on your machine? All right. I have tested these out on several different long arms. I have an APQS Millennium, works great. I spent a week with Novas, fantastic. I did a week at Handy Quilter, fantastic. All right, now but the education needs to be out there that these needles are exactly the same as the other needles that you'll be using. I hear a lot about the fact that if I put those in, I may have to retime my machine. In my opinion, if you're going to be a long armor, you should be able to retime your machine yourself anyway. Because especially working with leather, I found I broke many needles before I really figured out how to actually use it and what leathers to be using. Because if you break a needle, the chances are you're going to throw your timing off. Okay, it's not that big a deal, guys. Don't be afraid. And so a lot of long arm manufacturers now are actually producing timing tools to help you do that even easier. So if you are sewing on leather, especially if you're going over seams or using thicker leathers, you may actually throw your timing off. You may break a needle. That's going to happen. But if you use the leather that we have at Old City Quilts, you should never have that problem. I've had that problem when I really do a lot of layering. But the bottom line is, even with you guys out there, I've sent these needles again to Handy Quilter, to the company, directly to Salt Lake City. They did testing on all of their machines. This includes the Infinity. So, and it does, these needles do work on those machines. And so if your local dealer is telling you that they don't, you may want to have them contact the folks at headquarters, because they do work on this machine. I mean, come on. In my opinion, if I've paid $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for a machine to be able to create with, it damn sure better be able to create in anything that I want to create with. So if I want to sew on leather, then I want to be able to sew on leather if you spend that kind of money on a machine. So, don't be afraid to put these needles in. If you're having problems with them, then these needles are exactly the only difference between these needles and the other needles that you're used to using are the points. The other points have a rounded point that's used to go between the fibers. These have a sharp point that are used to cut through the fibers, and so that's the only difference between these needles and the needles that we're using. So again, we have them in 2 different sizes, and I would recommend getting a package of each size, and that way you can use it based on which thread you're using. Start with the smaller size. If you have problems with it, with your thread shredding, then go up a size. And don't, but again, like I said, you may not have any problems whatsoever quilting through the leather with the universal needles. You have to look at your stitches to see if there's any tearing happening. And if you see any tearing happening on the leather, that's when you need the leather needles. So I hope I've answered some of the questions for you. I've worked really hard with my partners at Old City Quilts to really have one location for all of your leather needs. It's been quite an adventure for me to find all the different components that I like to use. And so we're trying to really make it easier for you to bring it all into one place. We do have some new stuff that we're working on as far as the embellishments and that sort of thing. But again, and they are currently updating their website too to make it a lot easier for you to find the leather needs. So anyway, if you hope that answers your questions. If you have any additional questions that you would like to for me to address, just drop me a message on Facebook, and we'll be talking later. Thanks.